When a soldier inherits nothing but an island and a dog, the ocean begins to speak. The rain had stopped just long enough for Ethan Ward to hear the gulls again. Distant, restless, circling the gray horizon. He stood on the pier, suitcase at his feet, staring at the small ferry that would take him to an island no one cared about. His grandfather's lawyer had called it Greyhaven Rock. Vincent had called it a joke. But to Ethan, it was all that was left. No money, no estate, no family. Just a lonely scrap of stone and a retired German shepherd named Atlas. When the old fisherman brought the dog forward, Ethan saw a pair of amber eyes watching him. Calm, intelligent, almost human. The kind of eyes that don't just look at you, but through you. That was the beginning. No one knew that island hid something buried beneath decades of silence, or that one man and one dog would uncover a secret built to protect the world. The air inside the office of Sterling and Pierce, attorneys at law, was the kind of still that seemed afraid to move. The faint scent of lemon polish clung to the mahogany paneling, blending with the musk of old money and older secrets. Dust floated in the sunlight, like tired ghosts, drifting between shelves lined with books that no one had opened in years. Ethan Ward sat in one of the heavy leather chairs near the center of the room, his posture straight despite the weight pressing on his shoulders. Even out of uniform, he looked like a soldier, clean lines, sharp edges, and eyes that missed nothing. His short brown hair showed threads of gray, the kind that come not from age but from the years that strip a man down to his essentials. He wore a plain gray shirt beneath a faded denim jacket, jeans, and boots still dusted from the road. He didn't belong here among the mahogany and marble. He knew it. So did everyone else. Across from him lounged Vincent Hale, his cousin, 5 years younger, softer around the edges. His wealth wrapped around him like a shield. His suit was tailored to perfection. His watch gleamed, and his cologne carried a confidence that money buys, but decency doesn't. Vincent's expression, a permanent smirk, flickered with impatience as he tapped manicured fingers against the lawyer's desk. Between them sat Mr. Sterling, a thin man with parchment skin and spectacles that magnified the hollow gray of his eyes. His voice, when it came, was dry as dust. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Henry Ward," he began. Ethan's chest tightened at the sound of his grandfather's name. It had been nearly 15 years since he'd last seen the old man. A brief visit before Ethan's final deployment, ending in words they both regretted. Henry had always been stubborn, proud, and brilliant in ways that made others uncomfortable. He'd lived most of his life near the sea, building things nobody understood. To Ethan, he had been a mystery wrapped in salt and silence. The lawyer continued, listing assets in a monotone: investment portfolios, real estate holdings, shipping company shares. Each item, each figure, slid neatly into Vincent's possession. Vincent didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. His smirk grew wider, eyes glinting like glass under sunlight. When Sterling finally paused, he cleared his throat, as if reluctant to read the final part. "To my grandson, Ethan Ward." The words seemed to echo in the room, pulling every molecule of air toward them. Ethan's heart gave a quiet thump. "I leave my property at Greyhaven Rock, off the coast of Maine, and everything upon it. I also entrust to his care my loyal companion, Atlas." Vincent blinked, confused for a moment. Then it hit. The meaning, the insult, the absurdity. A laugh burst from his throat, high and sharp like breaking glass. "You've got to be kidding," Vincent said. "A rock and a dog? That's it? The old man really did go senile at the end." Ethan didn't respond. He sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on nothing, his expression unreadable. Inside, something trembled. Not anger, not disappointment, but something older, a feeling like recognition. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and added quietly, "There is a note attached to this bequest. Your grandfather wrote, 'Because only you understand the value of silence.'" Silence. The word hit Ethan like a physical blow. He could almost hear the hollow echo of it inside the chambers of his mind. The long, suffocating silence after gunfire. The silence of empty barracks, of folded flags. His breath caught. Vincent leaned forward, grinning, the predator scenting blood. "Well, cousin, looks like you're officially the keeper of nothing. Maybe you can train that dog to fetch you some purpose." The insult rolled off Ethan like a wave breaking against stone. He didn't flinch. His blue-gray eyes met Vincent's, calm and cold. Years of combat had taught him restraint, and restraint now was his armor. Mr. Sterling, perhaps sensing the tension simmering beneath the quiet, cleared his throat again. Mr. Ward also established a small trust for the maintenance of the property. It should cover basic expenses. Greyhaven Rock is isolated, reachable only by boat from Port Clive. A man named Jed Carver will assist you with transport and supplies. He's been compensated for his services in advance. Ethan nodded once, the motion deliberate and measured. His throat felt tight, his palms cold. The will, the words, the laughter. They all blurred into background noise. In their place, he saw only the face of his grandfather, framed by sea wind and stubborn pride, saying things he hadn't understood back then. The sea tells the truth if you listen long enough. Vincent stood, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. "Well, Ethan, congratulations. Guess you're the proud owner of a pile of rocks and a mutt. I'll toast to that tonight, somewhere with heating and Wi-Fi." He turned to leave, the scent of his cologne slicing through the stale air. Ethan remained seated, his eyes lowered to the floor. For a long moment, there was only the ticking of the old clock above the door. Slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of the room itself. Mr. Sterling broke the silence softly. "Your grandfather was deliberate, Mr. Ward. He never did anything without reason. I think you'll find Greyhaven to be more than it seems." Ethan looked up, meeting the lawyer's gaze. For the first time in months, a faint flicker of curiosity, or maybe hope, stirred beneath the layers of exhaustion. He reached for the folder Sterling slid across the desk. A property deed, a small map, a note written in Henry's unmistakable hand. The handwriting was firm, the lines steady despite age. "You'll find peace where the sea never sleeps." He folded the note carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. When he stood, the leather chair groaned, the sound oddly alive in the dead air. Vincent's laughter still lingered faintly in the hallway, echoing like a cruel afterthought. But Ethan's mind was elsewhere. The image of that lonely rock off the Maine coast had taken root. A place of silence, yes, but maybe also of answers. As he left the office, the afternoon sunlight hit him like a rebirth. The city noise roared back around him. Horns, footsteps, the distant hum of engines. And yet it all felt muffled, like hearing through water. He exhaled slowly, his breath fogging in the cool air. In his pocket, the paper crinkled softly. That single line. The final message from the only man who'd ever seen him for who he truly was. "Because only you understand the value of silence." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words settle deep. Then he straightened his shoulders, turned toward the street, and began walking. Not with purpose yet, but with the first faint stirrings of one. The city receded behind him, its lights dimming against the horizon. Ahead, somewhere beyond the fog and the tide, waited a forgotten island, an old house and a dog named Atlas. He didn't know it yet, but that silent inheritance, the one everyone else had laughed at, would soon become the only thing in the world that mattered. The city fell away in the rearview mirror like a memory that refused to fade. Steel and glass turned to asphalt and trees, and still Ethan Ward kept driving. The road stretched ahead, a gray ribbon twisting along the main coastline, where fog hung low and the horizon dissolved into mist. He didn't know what he expected to find at the end of it. Maybe nothing. Maybe that was the point. The hum of the old truck's engine was the only sound that kept him company. It was a tired machine, dented and scarred, much like the man behind the wheel. The heater groaned in protest every few miles, and the windshield wipers squeaked rhythmically, pushing aside beads of cold drizzle. Outside, the world blurred. Pine forests heavy with dew, ghostly houses crouched against the wind, and the occasional glint of the sea through breaks in the trees. Ethan's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind wasn't. It wandered through old corridors, deserts and mountains and the faces of men who never came back. Sometimes, without warning, the silence inside the cab broke with the echo of memory, the whine of distant mortars, the snap of gunfire, the heavy breath of panic clawing at his ribs. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. "Not now," he muttered under his breath. He had learned to talk himself through the attacks. Low voice, even rhythm, focus on what was real. The smell of rain, the hum of tires on wet asphalt, the taste of bitter coffee cooling in the cup holder. Reality was his lifeline, and he clung to it. By the second day, the world had quieted. The traffic thinned to almost nothing, and the radio gave up trying to reach him. He drove through miles of nothingness, fishing towns that looked half-abandoned, gas stations with rusted pumps, diners where the same three old men sat in silence by the window. Each stop along the way felt like a snapshot of the life he'd forgotten how to live. He didn't know when the change began. Maybe somewhere around Camden, when the fog grew thick enough to blur the sky from the sea. The noise inside his head softened, replaced by the steady rhythm of rain and tide. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about what he'd lost. He was just moving. When he reached the last turnoff, a cracked wooden sign that read Port Clive, the afternoon light was fading into silver. The town looked small enough to fit in a photograph. Wooden piers jutted out like broken fingers into the bay, and fishing boats swayed gently in their moorings. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and old rope. It was a clean, honest smell, sharp and alive. Ethan parked near the end of the dock. His headlights cut through the mist, revealing a figure bent over a net beneath a single yellow bulb. The man looked like he had been carved from driftwood, shoulders broad, beard thick, skin weathered by years of sea wind. He didn't look up right away, just kept working, his calloused hands moving with slow, practiced grace. "Jed Carver?" Ethan called, stepping out of the truck. His voice sounded strange in the open air, rougher than he remembered. The man straightened, squinting through the fog. "Aye," he said simply. His voice was gravel and tied. "You must be the ward boy." "Ethan," he corrected automatically. Jed gave a small nod, eyes studying him the way a man studies the weather, looking for signs of a coming storm. "Your grandfather said you'd come one day. Didn't say when." "He didn't tell me much of anything," Ethan replied. Jed's lips twitched, almost a smile. "That sounds like Henry," he jerked his head toward the end of the pier. "Your ride's waiting." Ethan followed. The boards creaked under their weight, the sea whispering beneath. Tied to a cleat was a small motorboat, its paint faded and chipped. A name barely legible on its side read, "The Mara." The boat looked old but seaworthy, like everything else in this place. But it wasn't the boat that made Ethan stop. Sitting perfectly still in the stern, as if carved from stone, was a dog, a massive German shepherd with a thick coat of silver and smoke-gray fur. His ears stood erect, his gaze locked on Ethan with quiet, intelligent intensity. No barking, no movement, just that unwavering focus. Jed noticed the way Ethan froze. "That'd be Atlas," he said. "Been waitin' since Henry passed. Won't leave the boat. Eats only when I bring him food. Drinks only when I tell him you're comin'. Smart beast, that one." Ethan took a step closer. The planks of the pier groaned underfoot. "He's beautiful," he murmured. Atlas tilted his head slightly, the faintest flicker of curiosity in his amber eyes. His posture was regal, disciplined, the posture of a soldier. Jed chuckled softly. "Aye, serious dog, for a serious man. Guess that's why Henry picked you." Ethan crouched slowly near the edge of the pier, keeping his movements measured. "Hey, Atlas," he said, his voice soft, almost unsure. "I'm Ethan." The dog's nose twitched, catching his scent. For a moment they just looked at each other, two creatures shaped by solitude, both suspicious of the world, but searching for something that made sense. Then Atlas moved. He stood, stretched once, and stepped closer to the edge of the boat. The pier creaked. His paws were silent as he leaned forward, nose hovering inches from Ethan's hand. Ethan extended his fingers, palm open, letting the dog decide. Seconds stretched. The world held its breath. Then, contact. Atlas pressed his cold, wet nose against Ethan's palm and exhaled. Something broke open inside him. A quiet, wordless understanding that neither of them was alone anymore. It wasn't trust yet, not fully. But it was the first spark of it, glowing faintly like a coal that could one day become fire. Jed looked away, giving them the dignity of silence. "We'd best go before the fog thickens," he said gruffly, stepping into the boat. "Tide's going out." Ethan followed, settling beside the dog. The motor coughed to life, a low rumble echoing over the still water. As they pulled away from the dock, Port Clive disappeared into the mist, swallowed by the sea and distance. The fog closed around them like a curtain. Ethan watched the faint outline of the shore fade, feeling the strange pull of the ocean beneath the hull. Atlas sat beside him, unmoving but alert, his eyes scanning the horizon. Every so often, he glanced up at Ethan, as if making sure the man was still there. The wind grew colder, sharper, filled with salt. Somewhere ahead, beyond the veil of fog, lay the forgotten island of Greyhaven Rock, and the secrets Henry Ward had buried there. Ethan leaned back, the chill biting into his skin. He didn't know what waited for him on that isolated rock, but for the first time in years, he felt something other than pain. It was small, fragile, and dangerous. Hope. Atlas shifted closer, his fur brushing Ethan's arm. Ethan reached out absently, fingers finding the warmth of the dog's coat. The contact was grounding, real. He looked ahead, into the unknown. Behind them, the mainland vanished. Ahead, the sea whispered a promise only men like him could understand. A promise of silence and maybe redemption. The first light of dawn crawled slowly over the horizon, staining the fog a faint gold before it broke apart into shards of color over the restless sea. The small boat bumped against the crude stone landing as Ethan Ward jumped ashore, boots meeting slick granite. The air bit at his face, sharp with salt and cold. This was Grey Haven Rock, his inheritance, his exile, and perhaps his salvation. The house stood at the highest point of the island, a dark silhouette against the bruised sky. Once it might have been proud, a sturdy wooden cottage perched above the endless waves, but now it leaned with age, its paint stripped to bare gray boards, its shutters hanging crooked. The place looked as though the ocean had been trying to reclaim it for decades. Behind him, Atlas leaped from the boat, landing beside him with perfect balance. His paws met the stone with a soft thud, his breath curling in white clouds. Ethan looked down at him, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well, boy," he murmured. "Home, sweet home." Atlas tilted his head, as if weighing the claim. Inside, the air was cold and thick with the scent of damp wood and salt. Dust floated through the slanted sunlight like suspended time. There was a table, a chair, a bed frame, and the faint outline of a fireplace blackened from years of use. Ethan stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening. The house groaned quietly under the weight of the wind. It was not a welcoming sound, but it was honest. He began to move through the rooms methodically, a soldier assessing terrain. Floorboards creaked beneath his boots. The ceiling dripped faintly where the rain had found its way in. Outside, the waves crashed in slow, rhythmic pulses, like the heartbeat of the island itself. Atlas followed at his heel, his claws clicking softly against the floor. The days that followed bled into one another. Gray mornings, long afternoons, and the steady rhythm of work. Ethan patched holes in the roof with boards scavenged from the shed, cleaned out the old stove, scrubbed away layers of mildew. Each task was a small war, each victory a fragile step toward reclaiming something, not just the house but a sense of purpose. He found himself talking aloud sometimes as he worked. Not much, just small things. "What do you think, Atlas?" Or, "We'll need more nails before that storm hits." The dog rarely made a sound, but his presence filled the space more than words ever could. When Ethan hammered, Atlas would lie in the doorway, eyes half closed, ears twitching toward the sea. When he rested, Atlas would press his head against Ethan's leg, grounding him in the present. Nights were harder. The island was beautiful by day, wild and vast, but at night it turned into something ancient and endless. The wind moaned through the cracks, the surf thundered below, and the dark pressed in like a living thing. Ethan would lie awake in the small bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the ghosts of his past to find him. They always did. He'd wake in a cold sweat, heart pounding, mind trapped in memories that smelled of cordite and burning sand. Gunfire, screams, the sound of a helicopter fading into nothing. Panic would rise like a wave, stealing his breath, turning the edges of the world into static. And then, warmth, a weight against his chest. The sound of slow, steady breathing beside him. Atlas. The dog had learned quickly. When the nightmares came, he would climb onto the bed without a sound, pressing his solid frame against Ethan's body until the tremors subsided. Sometimes Ethan would clutch fistfuls of his fur just to remind himself he was real. That this place, this silence, was not the battlefield. Eventually, exhaustion would take him back under, not into sleep exactly, but into a quieter kind of stillness. As weeks passed, the rhythm of the island took hold of him. Days began with the gray blush of dawn. He and Atlas would walk the perimeter, boots crunching over gravel and seaweed. The dog moved a few paces ahead, tail low, scanning the horizon. Seagulls screamed overhead, and the ocean exhaled in long sighs against the rocks. It became a ritual, their morning patrol. Afterward, Ethan would work on the house. The sound of hammer against wood mingled with the distant cries of gulls, the crash of surf, and the rustle of wind through the grass. The island had its own kind of music, raw, unpredictable, but oddly comforting. Atlas always stayed close, his ears flicking at every sound, his eyes tracking Ethan's every movement as if guarding him from the ghosts he couldn't see. It was during one of those patrols, about a month after he'd arrived, that the old instincts betrayed him. The fog that morning was thick, heavy as wool. The cliffs were slick, and the tide below roared louder than usual. Ethan had gone farther along the ridge than he should have, checking an old outpost near the northern point. For a while, the rhythm of the waves lulled him into calm, until something in the sound shifted. A single crack of thunder echoed across his memory. His heart kicked, his breath shortened. Suddenly, the sea wasn't the sea. It was a desert under mortar fire, and the salmo cries of gulls became the wails of the wounded. His knees went weak. The world tilted. He dropped to a crouch, gasping. The air felt too thin. His vision tunneled, edges closing in until all he could see was the foam smashing against the rocks below. The old terror returned, the one that whispered he didn't deserve to still be here. Then came movement, fast, deliberate. Atlas was there before Ethan even realized he'd called his name. The dog pushed his weight against Ethan's side, leaning into him with solid force. His heartbeat was steady, strong, an anchor in the chaos. Ethan clutched at his fur, his breath coming in broken gasps. "Easy," he rasped, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the dog or himself. Atlas stayed pressed against him, eyes fixed forward, silent as stone. The seconds stretched. Slowly, the rhythm of the dog's breathing began to match his own. Inhale. Exhale. The world returned. The sound of the surf, the sting of cold air, the roughness of granite beneath his knees. When Ethan finally looked down, his vision cleared. Atlas's eyes met his, calm, amber, knowing. The connection hit like a surge of electricity. All the walls he had built, all the numbness, cracked. A sob tore from his throat, raw and unguarded. He pressed his forehead to the dog's neck, the salt of his tears mixing with sea spray. "Good boy," he whispered, voice breaking. "Good boy." Atlas didn't move. He didn't need to. They stayed there for a long time. A man and a dog on the edge of the world, held together by the simple gravity of trust. When Ethan finally stood, the fog had begun to lift. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the water, turning the waves to molten silver. For the first time, Ethan didn't see the island as a prison. It looked like a place that could hold peace. Fragile, maybe, but real. He turned toward the cottage, Atlas trotting at his side. The house still leaned, the paint still peeled, but there was something different about it now. It wasn't haunted anymore. Not with ghosts. Not while they were here. The storm that swept through Greyhaven that night that had left the world washed clean by morning. The air smelled of salt and pine. The sky still low and heavy with clouds. Ethan moved through the cottage slowly, checking for leaks, securing what the wind had loosened. A broken shutter clattered against the wall until he caught it and drove a new nail through the hinge. He worked by instinct now. Fix what could be fixed, patch what could not. Routine was his new form of peace. By noon, he turned his attention to the last untouched corner of the house, a small study tucked behind the bedroom. It was a cramped space with a single window clouded by years of salt spray. A heavy oak desk sat beneath it, its surface warped by moisture. one leg splinted with an old piece of driftwood. Dust coated everything like a second skin. Ethan pulled the tarp from the desk and coughed as Shazam. Dust swirled in the sunlight. The drawers groaned when he tried to open them. Inside he found little at first. Brittle pencils, empty ink bottles, a compass, a few yellowed receipts. But when he tugged at the bottom drawer, it refused to move. He frowned. Gritting his teeth, he wedged his fingers along the edge and pulled harder. The drawer slid open halfway, then stopped again, catching on something solid inside. "What are you hiding?" he muttered. He knelt, running his hands along the inner frame. The wood felt uneven. His thumb brushed a small indentation, a circle carved into the panel. He pressed, and the bottom shifted with a faint click. A false panel. His pulse quickened. With gentle pressure, the board lifted free, revealing a narrow compartment beneath. Inside lay several leather-bound journals, their covers cracked and darkened with age. Beneath them, a rolled parchment tied with faded string, and a small brass instrument that looked like a compass but wasn't, its face etched with strange concentric rings. Ethan sat back on his heels, staring. The air felt different suddenly, charged. It was as though the room itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. He picked up the top journal carefully, the leather soft and cool under his fingers. On the first page, in precise, measured handwriting, was a name. Henry Ward, 1976. The lines were clean, deliberate, the script of a man used to order and precision. Ethan turned the page. What followed wasn't a diary. Not exactly. There were coordinates, sonar readings, wave height calculations, charts of tidal cycles drawn in neat blue ink, sketches of undersea ridges and notes written in the margins. Resonance consistent with deep sub-channel echo. Frequency 23.5 Hz. Reoccurs every lunar cycle. Ethan frowned, scanning line after line. The writing was technical, almost obsessive, but there was poetry in it too, a strange reverence for the ocean's sounds. Phrases like, "the hum of the granite," and "songs beneath the current." He flipped through more pages. There were graphs comparing currents, notations about underwater pressure points, and detailed diagrams of what looked like equipment, long cables, transducers, something like a listening array. The words acoustic chamber appeared several times. Atlas padded quietly into the room, nails clicking on the floorboards. He settled beside Ethan, watching with curious amber eyes. "What do you make of this, huh?" Ethan murmured, absently scratching the dog's neck. His voice carried a note of wonder he hadn't felt in years. The second journal was dated a year later. It contained even more detailed sketches. Cross-sections of rock formations labeled with depth measurements. At the center of every drawing was Greyhaven Rock itself, drawn like the heart of something much larger. The final pages were stranger still. Notes about vibrations felt through the stone during storms, about tones too low for human ears. "The sea speaks through the granite," one entry read. "Not all who listen understand." Ethan's throat tightened. He could almost hear Henry's gravelly voice saying the words. He pushed the journals aside long enough to unroll the parchment. It was a map, hand-drawn, frayed at the edges. The outline of the main coastline stretched across it, with Greyhaven marked by a small black dot. Radiating out from it were concentric circles, labeled with numbers and cryptic notations. It looked less like a navigation map and more like a sound diagram, waves spreading outward from a single source. The small brass instrument on the desk caught the light. Ethan turned it in his hand. It hummed faintly when he tilted it, a soft vibration like something alive. He had no idea what it was, but his gut told him it belonged to the same puzzle. He gathered everything onto the desk, arranging it like evidence. The room grew dim as clouds thickened outside, turning the light a dull silver. The wind whispered through the cracked window frame. Ethan read until his eyes ached. The words began to blur, and yet, beneath the equations and measurements, there was a kind of humanity, the loneliness of a man trying to talk to something vast and unresponsive. He found one passage written in darker ink, the pen strokes pressed harder into the page, as if Henry had written it during a sleepless night. They think I came here to escape. They're wrong. I came to listen. The ocean is ancient and alive. It remembers what we forget. Ethan closed the book slowly, fingers resting on the cover. The wind howled outside, shaking the window. Somewhere beneath that sound, faint but insistent, was the deep, rhythmic crash of waves against stone. For the first time, he heard it differently. Not as noise, but as language. He reached for the lantern on the shelf, struck a match, and lit it. The small flame grew steady, throwing a warm circle of light over the journals. Shadows danced across the walls. Atlas shifted beside him, his tail brushing the floor softly. Ethan leaned back in the chair, staring at the words scrawled across the pages. Decades of thought, observation, obsession. His grandfather hadn't been crazy. He'd been building something, recording something, listening. His gaze drifted toward the window. Outside, the sea stretched infinite and unknowable, its surface calm now but alive with movement beneath. The idea hit him suddenly. Wild, impossible but undeniable. What if he wasn't trying to escape the world? Ethan whispered, more to himself than to the dog. What if he was trying to hear it? Atlas lifted his head, eyes gleaming in the lantern light. Ethan smiled faintly. He wasn't crazy, he said softly, voice trembling with conviction. He was listening to the sea. The words hung in the small room like a vow, merging with the rhythm of the surf beyond the walls. He reached out, resting, a hand on the nearest journal. The paper felt fragile, but the legacy within it was anything but. Somewhere in those pages, in the math, in the maps, in the mystery, was the reason Henry had left him this place. As the lantern flickered and the wind sighed against the windows, Ethan sat in silence, the dog at his feet, and felt something stir deep within him. Not fear, not loneliness, but connection. For the first time in years, he wasn't adrift. He was part of something again, something larger than himself, something born of salt and sound and blood. And outside, as if in answer, the ocean whispered against the rocks, low, patient, eternal. The storm arrived without warning. By nightfall, the wind had turned violent, howling through the cracks in the old house like a chorus of ghosts. Rain hammered the roof in relentless sheets, and the entire cottage seemed to breathe, the walls expanding and contracting under each gust. The fire in the hearth struggled against the drafts, its flame flickering wildly across the room. Ethan Ward sat hunched beside it, a blanket draped over his shoulders, the journals spread open on the table. He'd been studying Henry's writings for hours, tracing diagrams, rereading lines that hinted at something buried, something hidden within the rock itself. The storm was just background noise now, an angry lullaby. At least, until Atlas started to change. The dog had been lying near the door earlier, chin on his paws, eyes half closed. But sometime after midnight, his body went rigid, his ears twitched toward the hearth. Then he rose, slowly, deliberately, and began pacing the floor, claws clicking against the wood. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, not looking up. "It's just the wind." Atlas ignored him. His head was low, nose twitching, movements sharp and restless. He circled the room twice before stopping directly in front of the stone hearth. For a moment he stood perfectly still, as if listening. Then, without warning, he began to scratch at the base of the hearth, paws raking against the old granite with frantic energy. The sharp sound jolted Ethan upright. "Hey, stop that!" he said, voice raised over the wind. But Atlas didn't stop. He growled low in his throat, not out of anger but frustration. It was a sound of insistence, of urgency. Ethan's first instinct was irritation, but it faded quickly. Something about the dog's posture made him pause. The intensity in Atlas's movements wasn't random. It was purposeful, trained. The memory came back unbidden. A sand-choked desert night. A military dog handler shouting across the comms. "Always trust your partner. If he alerts, you listen." Ethan's heart began to race. He crossed the room and crouched beside Atlas. "What is it, huh?" he asked softly. The dog stopped scratching, but kept his nose pressed against the stone, whining low. Ethan placed his hand on the hearth. The granite was cool and damp, nothing unusual, at first. But as his fingers moved along the edge, he felt it. A seam, faint and uneven, running beneath the outer layer of soot. A hidden line. He brushed the area clean with his sleeve. Under the layer of ash and time, a section of the stone looked subtly different, slightly darker, smoother, as if it had been cut and fitted deliberately. He stared, the sound of the storm dimming behind the rush of his pulse. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered. He went to the tool chest near the wall, grabbed a small pry bar, and knelt again by the hearth. Atlas stepped back, but stayed close, tail low, eyes locked on him. Ethan wedged the metal bar into the narrow gap and pushed. Nothing. He adjusted his grip, put his shoulder into it, and heaved again. The stone groaned, a deep, grinding protest, then shifted slightly, breaking its seal with a hiss of trapped air. The smell that escaped was strange, cold, metallic, and impossibly old. Sweat mixed with rain dripped down his face as he forced the slab upward. It was heavy, hundreds of pounds at least, but with a final grunt, he managed to prop it against the side of the fireplace. Beneath it was darkness, a hollow space. He leaned forward, holding the lantern over the opening. The light revealed a cavity lined in lead, smooth, dull, and perfectly sealed except for the top. Inside lay a rectangular metal box about the size of a briefcase. Its surface was tarnished but intact. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Jesus, Henry. What did you do?" The storm raged louder, as if demanding an answer. He reached in carefully, muscles straining as he lifted the box free. It was heavier than he expected. The lead had insulated it well. The air inside was cold, untouched by decades. He set it on the floor and knelt beside it, heart hammering. Atlas stayed close, ears pinned, body taut with anticipation. The box was sealed with two simple clasps. Ethan hesitated, then flipped them open. A soft, metallic click echoed through the small room. He lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped neatly in oilcloth, were two objects: a journal and something metallic, cylindrical, about 8 inches long, gleaming faintly under the lantern light. Ethan unwrapped the journal first. The oilcloth peeled back with a faint tear, revealing leather as dark as storm water. The first page bore Henry's familiar, steady handwriting. "This record is for whoever finds it. The sea remembers everything, but men forget. If you're reading this, it means the watch is yours." Ethan's mouth went dry. He set the book aside and turned to the second object. The metallic piece was heavier than it looked, crafted from solid brass. It wasn't a tool he recognized. The handle was shaped like a T, the cylindrical body etched with intricate grooves and notches, a design that looked both mechanical and ceremonial. He turned it in his hands, studying the craftsmanship. The grooves weren't random. They formed a pattern, a code. He felt the faintest hum through the metal, almost like vibration, though it could have been his imagination. The fire flickered, throwing light and shadow across the room. The storm's roar outside merged with the crackle of wood, the deep, rhythmic pulse of the sea below. Ethan's breath came shallow. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't ordinary. He could feel the weight of it, not just the physical mass, but the gravity of meaning. He remembered the diagrams in the journals, the sketches of machines buried in the granite, the talk of songs beneath the current, a listening post, a system hidden in the rock. The realization crept over him like a chill. His grandfather hadn't just studied the ocean. He'd built something into it. Ethan held the brass object closer to the firelight, the reflection burning gold across his face. "What were you guarding, old man?" he whispered. The words disappeared into the storm. Atlas let out a low, soft sound, not quite a bark, not quite a whine, as if echoing the question. For a long time, Ethan sat motionless, staring into the fire. The wind screamed against the windows, the house shuddered, but none of it reached him. He was somewhere else now, caught between fear and wonder, past and present. The key, if that's what it was, gleamed like a secret reborn. He placed it gently beside the newly uncovered journal and leaned back, closing his eyes. The old house creaked, the storm raged, and the sound of the sea filled every silence between the thunder. Henry Ward had hidden something beneath this rock, something that still breathed with purpose. And now, it was his. The storm passed by dawn, leaving the world raw and trembling. The cottage smelled of wet ash and seawater. The fire had long since gone cold, its embers reduced to faint orange dust. Ethan Ward sat on the floor before the hearth, the oil-wrapped journal open on his knees, the brass key gleaming beside him like something pulled from another century. Atlas lay curled nearby, his fur still damp, head resting on his paws. The wind outside had quieted, but the sea was restless, slamming the rocks below in slow, deliberate pulses, like the heartbeat of something ancient beneath the surface. Ethan turned another page. The handwriting inside was unmistakably Henry's, that same clean, methodical script. But this journal was different. It wasn't filled with tidal patterns or poetry about waves. It was history, confession, and blueprint all at once. In 1958, I was assigned to the U.S. Navy's SOSUS program, the Sound Surveillance System. Our mission was to listen to the ocean for what others could not see. Ethan read the line twice. He remembered hearing about the SOSUS network, a Cold War relic that used undersea microphones to detect Soviet submarines. His grandfather had worked on that? He continued. I was an engineer, not a soldier, but the sea taught me the same lesson. War teaches men. Everything hidden will one day speak. The granite beneath this island is unlike any I've seen. It amplifies vibration the way a cathedral amplifies song. I came to call it the Greyhaven Resonance. Ethan looked toward the floor, the very stone beneath him, as if he could feel that resonance himself. The wind outside sighed, and for a moment it did sound like the earth was humming. The entries grew more detailed, equations, cross-sections of the island's bedrock, diagrams of something massive carved beneath it. Then came a passage written in darker ink, more urgent strokes. They wanted weapons. I wanted guardians. I told them we could build a listening post, a sentinel to hear storms before they strike, quakes before they rupture, ships before they trespass, a watcher beneath the sea. They laughed, called it a monument to paranoia. So I resigned. And I built it myself. Ethan's pulse quickened. He flipped through pages filled with blueprints. Turbines, control panels, long corridors tunneled deep into rock. At the top of each page, Henry had scrawled 2 words: Project Sentinel. He whispered it aloud, testing how it felt on his tongue. Project Sentinel. The journal became more personal the deeper it went. I sold everything: patents, shares, even the house in Portland. The world thought I'd gone mad, retreating to an island with only a dog and a dream. But madness is often just solitude mistaken for purpose. The turbines are installed now, the chamber sealed. The power of the tides keeps it breathing, night and day. Ethan could picture him. The old man, younger then, working in the salt and wind, his hands cracked and bleeding, his mind set on something no one else could understand. A line near the bottom of the page made Ethan's breath catch. It is not a weapon. It is a prayer made of metal and stone, a promise that someone will always listen. He sat back, eyes burning. His throat felt tight. His grandfather hadn't abandoned the family, hadn't lost his mind, or retreated from the world. He had chosen isolation, to guard, to preserve, to listen. Ethan closed his eyes. He could almost hear Henry's voice, that rough, patient tone from childhood summers on the docks. You don't fight the ocean, boy. You learn its rhythm. You listen. He exhaled, the sound trembling out of him. His tears came slow and unbidden, tracking down his dirt-streaked face. When they hit his lips, they tasted like salt, no different from the sea. Atlas stirred, lifting his head. He pressed his nose to Ethan's hand, a quiet reassurance that felt both grounding and sacred. Ethan smiled faintly through the tears. Looks like the old man wasn't just feeding gulls out here, he murmured. He was guarding the deep. He turned to the final pages. The tone shifted again, sharper, coded, as if Henry had known others might find this. Columns of numbers, letters, and strange markings filled the page. Among them, a sketch, a jagged outline of Greyhaven's northern cliffs. At the center, a small circular engraving, a keyhole, drawn to match the notches on the brass device. Next to it, Henry had written a single cryptic note, visible only when the sea withdraws at its lowest breath, the spring tide. The path opens where the stone sighs. Ethan stared at the words, the realization dawning slow and heavy. The key wasn't symbolic. It was real. It belonged somewhere on this island, somewhere deep in the northern cliffs where the waves met granite. He leaned closer, tracing the coordinates written beside the sketch. They were precise, military grade. Whoever Henry had once been, he hadn't left this to chance. He found more, a sequence of arrows labeled ingress tunnel, control chamber, and primary array. Beneath it, in tiny writing, almost hidden by a smudge of ink, one last sentence. The watch must never fall silent. Ethan swallowed hard. For a long moment, he sat still, the lantern crackling softly beside him. The brass key glinted in its light, its grooves casting strange shadows across the wall. Outside, the surf crashed in rhythm, steady, unending, as if the island itself was whispering the same message. He rose slowly, the journal pressed against his chest. Atlas followed, tail swishing low, amber eyes locked on him. Ethan moved to the small window, looking out toward the sea. The morning light was pale and washed out, the horizon painted in bruised blues and grays. He thought of his cousin Vincent, of that cold office filled with the smell of lemon polish and disdain. Vincent had inherited money. He had inherited a mission. And somehow, That felt like the greater gift. He turned back to the table, laying out Henry's journals side by side. The old studies, the new confession. Together, they formed a map of obsession, of sacrifice, of faith. Project Sentinel, he whispered again. A listening post, built not for war, but for warning. Atlas's ears perked at the sound of his voice. Ethan crouched, rubbing the dog's neck. You knew, didn't you? He said softly, that there was something down there, something worth guarding. The dog's gaze didn't waver. Outside, a wave crashed louder than the rest, spraying up in a silver mist that glimmered through the cracked windowpane. Ethan's heart thudded once, hard. He reached for the brass key and held it up to the light. Its grooves caught the glow like veins of gold. The air felt charged again, electric with purpose. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. The watch must never fall silent. He clenched the key in his hand, feeling its cold bite against his skin. Don't worry, old man, he whispered, voice low and steady. The watch won't end with you. The promise settled between them. Man, dog, and the endless ocean beyond. Somewhere in the cliffs, hidden beneath decades of tide and stone, the heart of Project Sentinel waited to awaken. And Ethan Ward, soldier, survivor, grandson, would be the one to find it. The spring tide came with a silence that was almost reverent, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. Ethan Ward stood on the edge of the northern cliffs at dawn, boots sinking into slick moss, the wind biting through his jacket. The storm from 2 nights before had scoured the island clean. Every rock shone dark and wet under the pale sky. Below him, the sea was retreating, drawn back by the moon's pull, revealing jagged shapes that had never seen daylight. Greyhaven Rock was changing. He glanced at the old journal clutched in his gloved hand. Henry's final instructions written in that unwavering hand. Visible only when the sea withdraws at its lowest breath, the spring tide. This was the moment. Atlas stood beside him, tail low, ears pricked toward the roar of the surf. His fur was dusted with salt spray, his muscles tense and ready. When Ethan looked down at him, the dog's amber eyes reflected both warning and trust. All right, partner, Ethan murmured. Let's find what he left us. He slung a small waterproof pack over his shoulder. Inside were a flashlight, a coil of rope, a compass, and the brass key. Its weight had become a familiar presence, like carrying a promise. He started down the narrow trail that wound along the cliff's side. Atlas followed, his paws sure-footed on the slick stone. The descent was brutal. Seaweed and rain had turned the granite into a treacherous slope. Ethan's boots slipped more than once, sending pebbles skittering down toward the frothing surf. The air grew heavy with the scent of brine and kelp. When they reached the bottom, the tide had pulled so far back that the seabed lay exposed, a dark, gleaming plain of stone veined with green algae and crawling barnacles. The wind had died completely. The only sounds were the hollow drip of water from cracks in the rock and the steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing. He opened the map and studied it again. The drawings were rough, but the landmarks were clear. A trident-shaped outcropping of stone, its 3 jagged prongs pointing seaward. Henry had called it the Kraken's Arms. Ethan turned his gaze toward the northern horizon, and there it was. A massive formation jutted from the earth like the spine of some ancient beast. 3 long ridges stretched outward from a central mass, slick with seaweed and foam. It looked alive, a fossilized monster waiting for the tide to return. He started toward it, the sound of his boots squelching through the wet sand. Atlas trotted ahead, nose low, occasionally stopping to glance back and make sure Ethan followed. When they reached the formation, the scale of it stole Ethan's breath. Each arm was 20 feet thick, rising from the sea like walls of polished stone. Waves lapped weakly at their bases. The Asmir Jones Journal's instructions came back to him. Follow the Kraken's arms to the heart of the trident. He ran a hand along the cold, wet rock, tracing its grooves until he found the narrow passage that led between the three prongs. It was just wide enough for a man and a dog to squeeze through. They stepped into the shadows together. Inside, the air grew colder. The sunlight faded to a dim green glow filtered through the seaweed draped above them. The sound of the ocean was muffled here, distant and strange, like listening to the world through glass. Atlas stopped suddenly, sniffing the air. His tail went stiff, his muscles coiled. "What is it?" Ethan whispered. The dog padded forward a few more feet and stopped again, nose pressed against the cliff wall. He let out a single, sharp bark. Ethan's pulse quickened. He dropped to one knee beside him, running his hands over the rock. At first, it felt seamless, just slick stone covered in algae. But when he brushed away the slime with his sleeve, his fingertips found it. A circular indentation, perfectly smooth, no bigger than a coin. He cleared the area carefully, revealing a gear-like pattern carved into the stone, a match to the brass key's intricate grooves. "Son of a—" Ethan exhaled, awe mixing with disbelief. He pulled the key from his jacket pocket. The brass gleamed in the low light, etched with Henry's strange craftsmanship. He hesitated only a second, then fit it into the hole. It slid in perfectly, so perfectly that he could feel the mechanism recognize it, like a lock welcoming its missing piece. "Here we go," he murmured. He twisted the handle clockwise. At first, nothing happened. Then, deep within the rock, a sound began. Low and distant, like the grinding of ancient gears turning for the first time in decades. The ground vibrated under his boots. Atlas backed up, ears flattened, letting out a deep, warning growl. Ethan steadied himself. "Easy, boy." A faint line appeared around the indentation, a thin crack of light, widening as the stone began to move. The entire cliff face shuddered. Pebbles rained down from above. Slowly, impossibly, the rock began to split. It wasn't breaking. It was opening. The sound deepened into a resonant groan, as though the earth itself were exhaling. A massive rectangular section of the cliff slid backward with deliberate precision, revealing a dark void beyond. A tunnel. Cold air spilled out, dry and metallic, smelling faintly of ozone and old machinery. Ethan lifted his flashlight, the beam cutting into the blackness. The light illuminated smooth walls lined with some kind of composite metal, not natural stone but engineered. Henry hadn't just built a chamber underground. He had hollowed out the heart of the island. Ethan's throat tightened. "My God!" The wind picked up again outside, carrying the distant sound of waves returning. Time was short. He turned to Atlas. "Stay close." The dog didn't need to be told twice. He moved to Ethan's side, pressing against his leg. Together, they stepped forward into the tunnel. The moment Ethan crossed the threshold, a deep vibration rippled through the floor, a living heartbeat in the metal beneath his boots. The sound of the sea faded behind them until there was nothing left but the hum of the island itself. He glanced back once. The opening behind them was already beginning to close, the mechanism reversing with a heavy, echoing grind. For a heartbeat, sunlight glinted off the water outside. Then it vanished, sealed away. Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight. Its beam wavered slightly, slicing through the thick darkness. The air was cold enough to sting his lungs. Every sound, the creak of his boots, Atlas's soft panting, echoed unnaturally, as if the tunnel were swallowing noise. He felt the press of the earth around him, tons of granite and water held back by nothing but his grandfather's design. Awe and terror mingled inside him. The path sloped downward. A faint metallic hum grew stronger with each step, pulsing like a signal buried deep below. Ethan recognized that rhythm. It was the same frequency Henry had described in his notes, the resonance of Greyhaven rock. He felt it now, thrumming through his bones. "Henry," he whispered, voice echoing, "what did you build down here?" Atlas whined softly, leaning into his leg. The dog's body trembled, not from fear but from instinct, as if he too could feel the living heartbeat of the place. Ethan steadied the flashlight and looked ahead. The tunnel curved downward into total blackness, like a vein leading into the heart of the world. "All right," he said, breath fogging in the cold air. "Let's see what's waiting for us." He took another step. The darkness swallowed them whole. The tunnel sloped downward for what felt like an eternity. The air grew colder, denser, filled with the faint metallic scent of machinery long dormant. Ethan Ward's flashlight beam cut through the dark, tracing smooth walls that looked more engineered than carved. The deeper they went, the more the hum beneath their feet strengthened. Steady, rhythmic, alive. Atlas stayed close, his paws soundless against the steel grating. Occasionally the dog would pause, ears swiveling, as if catching sounds Ethan could not hear. Frequencies too deep for the human ear. Ethan could feel them instead, low vibrations that pulsed in his chest, echoing the ocean's hidden heartbeat. Then, suddenly, the tunnel widened. The flashlight beam fell into an open void, a cavern so vast that its scale defied comprehension. Ethan stopped at the edge, breath catching. Before him stretched a colossal chamber carved into the living granite, the walls lined with polished steel panels and dormant machines. A suspended catwalk extended into the open air, ending at a raised central console surrounded by banks of silent servers. And on the far wall, dominating the entire space, was a massive curved screen, dark now but shimmering faintly with reflected light, like the surface of a still pond waiting to awaken. Ethan's heart pounded. "Jesus," he whispered. The place was a cathedral, not of faith, but of function, precision, and purpose. His grandfather's words from the journal came flooding back, a prayer made of metal and stone. He crossed the threshold, boots echoing against the catwalk. The sound reverberated up into the dome and back again, swallowed by the chamber's impossible depth. Atlas followed silently, every sense alert, tail low but steady. When they reached the main console, Ethan saw that it was covered in a fine layer of dust, but every lever and switch remained intact. On the surface, Henry's handwriting still marked the labels, precise, deliberate script written in permanent ink. A piece of laminated paper was pinned beside the control panel. Ethan brushed away the dust and read, "Primary power, engage turbines. Secondary flow, activate coolant system. Initialize processor array, sequence alpha. Final, acoustic array, online." He let out a shaky breath. His hands trembled slightly as he traced the old engineer's instructions. This was it, the activation sequence. He unzipped his pack and pulled out the small notebook he'd brought, Henry's operational notes. Flipping to the bookmarked page, he found the final set of directions. System dormant until reinitiated by key or manual sequence. Do not fear the hum. It means she's breathing again. Ethan swallowed hard and glanced at Atlas. "You ready, boy?" The dog gave a quiet chuff, a small sound, but it was enough. Ethan turned to the nearest switch. The metal was cold under his fingertips. He took a breath and flipped it upward. A low rumble rolled through the chamber. Somewhere far below, machinery groaned to life. The vibration rose through the catwalk, shaking dust from the rafters. "Power engaged," Ethan muttered, reading from the guide. "Step 1 down." He moved to the next lever. "Coolant system. Online." He pulled it. A deep hiss filled the room, followed by the whirring sound of pumps waking from decades of stillness. Frost bloomed briefly on the metal rails before dissipating in the air. Atlas whined softly, his gaze darting toward the sound. "It's all right," Ethan said quietly. "She's just waking up." One by one, he followed the sequence, each command bringing the station closer to life. The noise built slowly, layer by layer, turbines spinning, processors humming, the steady pulse of electricity finding new pathways. Finally, he reached the last control, a single button covered by a small, clear safety cap. The label beneath it read, "Acoustic Array, Online." Ethan hesitated. He could feel the weight of this moment pressing on him. Years of silence waiting to be broken. Henry had built this for a reason. To listen. To protect. To understand. He pressed the button. The result was instantaneous. A deep vibration surged through the floor. Not harsh or mechanical, but resonant, harmonic. The curved screen at the far end of the chamber flickered to life, flooding the room with pale green light. Lines of data began scrolling across its surface in cascading columns of code. Then, as the initialization completed, the display transformed. The green faded into color, blues, purples, and shimmering golds spreading outward in expanding circles. Ethan realized what he was seeing. Sound made visible. The ocean's voice rendered into living light. He stepped closer, entranced. The patterns moved like auroras underwater. Each hue corresponded to something. The rhythmic pulse of distant currents, the slow echo of tectonic movement, the faint chatter of marine life. The entire Atlantic seemed alive before him, speaking in wavelengths and color. Atlas stood beside him, ears tilted forward, mesmerized by the glowing screen. Ethan whispered, barely audible, "It's beautiful." The data shifted again. Bright blue streaks flitted across the display. Dolphins. Then, a slow-moving red pulse near the top of the map. A cargo ship miles away. A glowing storm front rolled in like a bruise, its signature visible in the low, rumbling frequencies. Ethan watched it all, transfixed. It wasn't technology anymore. It was music. The sea was singing, and this machine, this masterpiece of solitude and genius, was the instrument translating its song. His throat tightened. His eyes stung. He thought of Henry, working alone on this rock, pouring his life into a dream no one believed in. Everyone had called him a hermit, a failure. But here, in the bowels of the earth, his truth still breathed, listening, learning, protecting. Ethan blinked back tears, but they came anyway. They rolled down his cheeks, salt mixing with the salt that surrounded them. He reached out and touched the screen. It was cool beneath his fingertips, vibrating gently, alive. For the first time in years, Ethan felt peace. Not the hollow kind he'd tried to find in isolation, but something deeper, a sense of belonging. He glanced down at Atlas, who met his gaze with calm, steady eyes. In that shared silence, man and dog stood as witnesses to a miracle. Two sentinels bound by loyalty and loss, now joined by legacy. Something glinted on the console. Ethan wiped away the dust to reveal a brass plaque affixed just below the main controls. The engraving was neat, confident. Henry's hand again. Use it to protect, not to profit. The watch is now yours. Ethan exhaled a shuddering breath. The watch is now yours. He repeated the words under his breath like a vow. The hum of the station filled the silence, steady, patient, eternal. He turned off his flashlight. The entire chamber was now illuminated by the glowing screen, shifting colors of the ocean playing across his face and the steel walls. Atlas lay down at his feet, his body relaxed for the first time since they'd arrived on the island. The dog closed his eyes, breathing in rhythm with the low thrum of the machinery. Ethan sank into the nearby chair, still staring at the living ocean projected before him. He didn't know what lay ahead, or what responsibilities came with this inheritance, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. His grandfather hadn't left him a prison. He'd left him a purpose. Outside, far above, the sea continued its endless song. But now, for the first time in decades, someone was listening. The weather turned first. For 3 days, the sky had been gathering itself, layer upon layer of gray clouds rolling in from the Atlantic, like an advancing army. The air was thick with that peculiar stillness that always came before a storm, the kind that made even the sea hold its breath. Ethan Ward could feel it in his bones. He stood outside the rebuilt shack, the one he had turned into a humble shelter above the hidden station, his eyes scanning the horizon. The barometer on the wall had dropped sharply overnight. The smell of ozone was sharp, metallic. The ocean looked wrong, glassy and tense, reflecting the weight of the sky like a dark mirror. Atlas stood beside him, tail rigid, nose lifted to the wind. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Ethan murmured. The answer came a heartbeat later. A distant mechanical hum, faint at first but unmistakable. Not thunder. Engines. Ethan's gut went cold. He snatched the binoculars from the porch rail and peered through them toward the mist-shrouded horizon. There, cutting through the fog like a silver blade, came the sharp silhouette of a yacht. Sleek, expensive, and entirely out of place in these hostile waters. The sight struck him like a blow. He knew that yacht. Vincent. Of course, Ethan whispered bitterly. The realization curdled into anger as he watched it draw nearer, white hull gleaming like arrogance itself. His cousin had returned, not to reconcile, not to mourn, but to take what he couldn't inherit. The wind began to rise, whipping Ethan's hair against his forehead. Atlas barked once, sharp and warning. "Inside," Ethan said quietly. "We'll be ready." By the time the yacht anchored in the small cove below, the storm had found its voice. The waves were turning violent, slamming into the rocks with hollow, booming force. Through the rain-streaked window, Ethan saw them, Vincent Croft in his designer raincoat and 2 hired thugs behind him. They stepped clumsily onto the slick pier, out of place in this wild coastal storm. Vincent smiled sharply. "Ethan, cousin, you've been hard to reach." Ethan stepped outside, Atlas close beside him. "What are you doing here?" Vincent spread his arms. "Visiting family, checking on the old man's favorite grandson, and his pet." Atlas growled low. "You shouldn't be here," Ethan warned. Vincent's laugh was sharp as glass. "I did some digging about what this island really is." A chill went through Ethan. Vincent stepped closer, rain streaking his hair. "Missing funds, strange equipment, naval patents. I know what Henry built under this rock, and who'll pay a fortune for it." "You're out of your depth," Ethan said. Vincent sneered. "Spare me the noble act. I have investors waiting offshore. They don't care who gets hurt." Lightning split the sky. Atlas barked once, standing guard. You think that mutt will stop me? Vincent mocked. Ethan's voice turned quiet, deadly. Try me. The tall mercenary Rook shifted uneasily. Boss, weather's getting worse. We're not leaving, Vincent snapped. Henry didn't leave you this place because he knew you'd sell it, Ethan said. You'd trade his life's work for another yacht. Vincent's face twisted. And you think you deserve it? You, the broken soldier hiding here? Ethan met his eyes. I'm guarding it. Thunder exploded overhead. Waves battered the cliffside. Vincent's rage peaked. Rook, Finn, get the door open, Ethan shouted. You don't know what you're doing. But greed roared louder than reason. Rook slammed his shoulder into the cottage door. It cracked, splinters flying. Atlas tensed, waiting for Ethan's signal. Vincent, Ethan cried. Henry built it to protect, not to sell. Vincent's eyes burned. Then he should have protected me. The door burst inward. Wind and rain howled through the house. Atlas barked furiously as the men rushed inside. Then the ground shuddered. A low groan rose from beneath the floor. Ethan's stomach dropped. The ledge, the entire house trembled. The ocean below was tearing at the cliff's roots. Vincent's confidence faltered. What's happening? You opened something you don't understand, Ethan shouted. Lightning struck the ridge. The roof split. Get out! A massive wave shattered the windows, flooding the room. Atlas grabbed Ethan's sleeve and pulled him toward the hearth. Beneath it, a trap door. Henry's escape route. The station, Ethan breathed. Good boy. They dove through as the cottage collapsed behind them. The world became thunder and falling stone, then silence. In the narrow tunnel, Ethan lit a lantern. Vincent gasped beside him, drenched and pale. You knew this was here? Henry built it for safety, not greed. Atlas shook himself dry, alert but unhurt. They pressed deeper into the tunnel until it opened into a cavern, the heart of Project Sentinel. The old sonar array flickered to life, glowing ghostly blue. Ethan moved to the console, fingers racing over Henry's controls. Then he froze. On the sonar screen, a shape moved fast beneath the waves. A submarine. Vincent's voice trembled. What is that? Your investors, Ethan said, grimly. They're here, and armed. The sub's signal grew stronger, closing in. If they couldn't take Sentinel's tech, they'd destroy it. Ethan quickly accessed Henry's coded interface and transmitted an emergency signal. Vulture's nest compromised. Hostile sub inbound. Request intercept. Priority Alpha. A faint acknowledgement flickered back. Help was coming, but not fast enough. Atlas growled at the screen, sensing the metallic predator outside. Ethan's jaw set. You wanted to sell a miracle, he told Vincent. You just invited war. Vincent shook his head, hollow. I didn't mean. Meaning doesn't matter, Ethan snapped. Actions do. The chamber trembled as sonar pulses rippled through the stone. Ethan rerouted what power remained, activating Henry's hidden defense array. A deep hum filled the air. The very rock vibrated as the array emitted a low-frequency tone. Dust rained from the ceiling. Then, another blip on the sonar. Smaller, faster. The Coast Guard. Ethan watched as the two signals converged, Hunter and Protector colliding in the deep. A flash flared across the screen. The sub's signal wavered, then vanished. Silence. The sea calmed. The island held. Ethan sagged against the console, exhausted. Atlas pressed close, tail weakly thumping. Vincent sank to his knees, shaking. I didn't know, Ethan's voice softened. Now you do. The storm still raged above, but here below, peace returned. Ethan knelt beside Atlas, stroking his fur. You saved us, boy. Atlas sighed, a quiet, human sound. Hours later, dawn light filtered down the fractured tunnels. When rescue teams arrived, helicopters and ships surrounding the ruined island, Ethan stood waiting, silent amid the wreckage. A stern man in a navy jacket approached. Ethan Ward? He said. I'm Admiral Hayes. We received your transmission. You prevented a theft, and maybe worse. The Navy owes you. Ethan shook his hand. His eyes drifted to the calm horizon. Hayes followed his gaze. We'd like you to stay on as Sentinel's guardian, officially. Ethan looked down at Atlas beside him. You found me a purpose, he whispered. I'll keep the watch, for both of us. When the new station was rebuilt, sunlight gleamed on steel and stone. Ethan and Atlas stood together on the restored cliffside, watching the sea stretch endless and bright. Ethan laid a hand on Atlas's head. The dog leaned against him, steady as the tide. Together, they listened, to the rhythm of waves, to the hum of the living earth, to the quiet legacy of a man who built something worth guarding. Two silhouettes stood against the boundless blue, man and dog, the last sentinels of the deep. Sometimes the greatest lessons about love and loyalty don't come from people. They come from the quiet companionship of a dog who never leaves your side. German shepherds, especially, have that rare gift of seeing straight into a person's heart. They don't care about mistakes or medals. They care that you're there, that you're trying, that you still reach out your hand. Ethan's story reminds us how powerful that bond can be, how a single, faithful animal can guide us back from silence, from grief, from the edge of ourselves. Every bark, every nudge, every shared breath carries something sacred, the reminder that we're never truly alone. If you've ever felt that same connection, or want to build it deeper with your own dog, there's a wonderful place I've found that helps you do just that. No pressure, no gimmicks, just genuine ways to understand them better and make every moment count. You can take a look when you have time, because in the end, that's what matters most. Not what we teach our dogs, but what they quietly teach us about love, trust, and what it means to come home.